Two legends, one room, no referee, no cameras, and a moment so fast most people would miss it completely. This wasn't a fight. There were no gloves, no bell, no crowd screaming for blood. Yet what happened in those few seconds would ignite one of the greatest debates in combat history: power versus speed. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. On one side stood a man the world knew for raw dominance, heavyweight champion, a voice that filled arenas, a presence that made grown men doubt themselves before the first punch was thrown. On the other side stood someone entirely different, smaller, calmer, barely moving. A man whose danger didn't come from size, but from how little time you'd have to react. They weren't there to prove ego. They weren't there to entertain. They were there to understand something far more important. Because for years, fans argued endlessly. Who would win? The strongest puncher the boxing world had ever seen, or the fastest martial artist to ever live? But what no one expected was that one single move would quietly answer a question that punches never could. No trash talk, no challenge, just a moment, a breath, a shift in weight, and suddenly everything changed. This wasn't about who hits harder. It was about who controls the moment before the hit even exists. Most people think fights are decided by impact. They're wrong. They're decided before impact in timing, distance, and awareness. And in this room, between Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee, that truth was about to reveal itself without a single punch landing. Before we go any further, pause for a second and think, if power meets speed, which one do you believe wins and why? Keep that answer in your mind, because by the end of this story, you might completely change it. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand who these two men truly were, not just as fighters, but as forces of nature built in completely different ways. Muhammad Ali was not just a heavyweight champion, he was a phenomenon. At over 200 pounds, Ali moved with a grace that made no sense for his size. Heavyweights weren't supposed to dance. They weren't supposed to float. Yet Ali did both, while carrying knockout power in every punch. His jab wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. Fast, sharp, and humiliating. He didn't simply hit opponents, he controlled them, mentally and physically. Ali's confidence was loud, fearless, and intentional. He spoke before fights, during fights, and even while punches were flying toward his face. Not because he needed attention, but because he understood something most fighters didn't. Power starts in the mind. Across from him stood Bruce Lee, the opposite in almost every visible way. Where Ali filled space, Bruce conserved it. Where Ali expressed dominance with words, Bruce used silence. He wasn't built for arenas or belts. He was built for precision. Bruce Lee's body was a system, not a weapon. Every movement had a purpose. Every inch of distance mattered. Speed to him wasn't about moving fast. It was about arriving first. He studied timing the way others studied strength. Angles instead of force. Efficiency instead of endurance. Bruce didn't believe in fixed styles. He believed in adaptation, in removing what was unnecessary until only truth remained. To Ali, a fight was a rhythm, something you could disrupt with footwork, reach, and psychological pressure. To Bruce, a fight was a moment, a fraction of a second where preparation met opportunity. And that difference is why the debate never died. Fans of Ali believed no one could survive his power. Fans of Bruce believed no one could touch him before it was too late. Two men, two philosophies, both undefeated in their own worlds. This wasn't about who was better. It was about what mattered more when everything was stripped away, power or speed. And the world had never seen those two ideas stand this close to each other before. Long before this moment ever took shape, the argument had already been raging. It started in gyms, moved into magazines, then exploded across interviews, barbershops, and eventually the internet. One question refused to die: who would win? Supporters of Muhammad Ali spoke with certainty. They pointed to history, to heavyweight champions who crushed men with a single punch, to size, reach, and durability. How does speed matter? They asked, when one clean hit ends everything. To them, Ali wasn't just a boxer, he was proof that power, confidence, and will could dominate any fight. On the other side were those who followed Bruce Lee. They didn't talk about belts or weight classes. They talked about reaction time, about distance, about what happens before a punch is thrown. They argued that speed changes the rules entirely, that a faster fighter decides when contact happens, or if it happens at all. To them, Bruce Lee represented something deeper than combat. He was evolution, a rejection of old limits. As the debate grew louder, myths began to form. Stories of secret fights, rumors of underground matches, claims that one man had already beaten the other behind closed doors. None of it was true, but that didn't stop people from believing. What most fans didn't realize was that neither Ali nor Bruce fed the fantasy. In fact, both men understood something the world ignored. They weren't built to fight each other. Ali respected rules, rhythm, and rounds. Bruce respected reality, unpredictability, and efficiency. A boxing ring and a street were not the same universe. Ali once joked about it, smiling as he dismissed the idea of chaos. Bruce, when asked, spoke calmly, never insulting, never boasting. There was no hatred, no challenge issued, no desire to prove dominance, only curiosity. What would happen if power met speed in its purest form, without ego, without violence? The world wanted a winner. The legends wanted understanding. And that's why this moment mattered more than any imaginary fight. Because when two masters meet without the need to conquer, something rare happens. Truth replaces noise. And that truth was about to surface not through fists, but through observation. The debate had divided the world for years. But in one quiet moment, it would begin to settle itself. The setting was nothing like people imagined. No ring lights, no cameras hidden in corners, no crowd waiting for something to explode, just a quiet space, controlled, neutral, and intentionally simple. This was not a place for performance. It was a place for awareness. Muhammad Ali stood relaxed, weight shifting lightly from foot to foot. His posture looked casual, almost playful, but it wasn't careless. Years of championship rounds had trained his body to stay loose under pressure. He smiled easily, not to intimidate, not to distract, but because calm was his natural state inside confrontation. Bruce Lee stood a few steps away. Still, balanced, every part of him seemed connected, as if movement could begin and end from the same point. His eyes didn't wander, they didn't challenge either. They observed. No words were exchanged, none were needed. This silence wasn't awkward, it was deliberate. Ali was reading space, measuring reach, distance, rhythm. Bruce was reading intent, timing, tension, readiness. Each man was doing what he did best. Time felt slower here, not because anything had changed, but because both men were fully present. Ali rolled his shoulders lightly, staying loose. Bruce barely moved at all, and that contrast mattered. Ali's style thrived on motion, on creating patterns and then breaking them. Bruce's style thrived on stillness, on removing patterns entirely. Neither rushed, neither tested, neither tried to dominate. Because in this moment, the goal wasn't to win. It was to understand. Every breath, every micro shift of weight, every blink was information. Information both men absorbed instantly. This was the part no audience ever sees, the moment before action, the moment where outcomes are decided long before force is applied. Ali felt it. Bruce recognized it. A mutual awareness settled in the room, the kind that only exists when two masters recognize mastery in each other. This wasn't tension born from fear, it was tension born from respect. And in that silence, both men knew something important. If anything happened next, it would happen fast. Too fast for noise, too fast for reaction. The quiet wasn't empty, it was loaded. Nothing announced the moment. There was no signal, no shift dramatic enough for an untrained eye to notice. The change happened between breaths. Muhammad Ali was mid-sentence, relaxed, smiling, completely at ease. Not because he underestimated the man in front of him, but because calm had always been his advantage. And that's when it happened. Not an attack, not a strike, a demonstration. Bruce Lee moved. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like nothing more than a subtle motion, a hand rising, a body advancing no more than an inch. But to Ali, everything changed instantly. Before his thought could finish forming, Bruce's hand was already there, stopping just short of contact, close enough to prove the point, controlled enough to show intent. No impact, no aggression, just precision. The distance Bruce closed wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. He had crossed space, broken timing, and arrived before reaction could even begin. Ali's smile shifted, not into fear, not into anger, into recognition. This wasn't about strength. This wasn't about endurance. This was about access. Bruce had entered the space where power becomes irrelevant, the space before a punch is born. Ali didn't flinch. He didn't step back. Instead, he laughed softly, a genuine laugh. Because Ali understood immediately what had just been shown. Speed doesn't challenge power head-on, it bypasses it. In that fraction of a second, Ali realized something few heavyweights ever experience, what it feels like to be outpaced without being threatened. Bruce withdrew just as smoothly as he had entered. No tension remained in his body, no follow-through. The move wasn't meant to dominate, it was meant to communicate. Ali nodded, not as a concession, but as acknowledgement. This single motion carried more meaning than a full exchange of punches ever could. It answered a question without violence. It demonstrated a truth without humiliation. Power needs time, speed controls time. And in that moment, both men stood in silence again, not because nothing had happened, but because everything had. No crowd would have understood it. No camera could have captured it. But for the two men in that room, the message was perfectly clear. The debate didn't end with a blow. It ended with understanding. The silence that followed felt different. Not heavy, not tense. Clear. Muhammad Ali exhaled slowly, his posture still relaxed, but his awareness sharpened. There was no bruised ego in his expression, only curiosity, the kind that appears when a master encounters a truth he can't ignore. Ali understood power better than almost anyone who had ever lived. He knew what it felt like to end a fight with a single moment of impact. But now he had felt something else, the absence of time, and that changed the equation. He smiled again, this time with respect woven into it, not for technique alone, but for intelligence. Bruce Lee, in turn, didn't celebrate, he didn't explain. He simply stood calm as before. Because Bruce also understood something in that moment. If power ever lands clean, speed no longer matters. He knew that dominance doesn't belong to one attribute. It belongs to context. Ali's reach, timing, and resilience were real. Bruce never dismissed them. He acknowledged them silently. Two different worlds had briefly overlapped. What became clear wasn't a winner, it was a boundary. Power decides outcomes. Speed decides access. Neither was superior on its own. Ali respected the idea that speed could neutralize opportunity. Bruce respected the reality that power ends possibility. They didn't argue, they didn't need to. The realization was mutual. Combat wasn't about proving whose path was right. It was about knowing when each path works, and when it doesn't. In that understanding there was no disappointment, only clarity. Two legends, walking separate roads, had paused just long enough to recognize the value in the other's journey. And that moment stayed with them, not as a challenge unanswered, but as a lesson learned. That quiet moment never needed headlines. There was no official statement, no winner declared, no story exaggerated for applause. And yet, its impact lasted far longer than any staged fight ever could. Muhammad Ali continued to redefine greatness, not just through power, but through intelligence, timing, and presence. Bruce Lee continued to reshape how the world understood movement, efficiency, and awareness. They didn't change each other's paths. They didn't need to. They expanded the understanding of what mastery looks like. The lesson was simple but deep. Strength alone is incomplete. Speed alone is fragile. True dominance comes from knowing what tool matters in the moment, and having the humility to respect what you don't control. That's why this story endures. Not because of who would win, but because of what was learned without violence. Legends don't chase validation, they leave clarity behind. If you made it this far, more powerful stories like this are coming, stories that focus on moments' meaning, and the truths hidden between action and silence. Let us know which part of this story stood out to you the most. Your feedback helps shape what comes next.